Martha Malloy. Martha is from Toronto, hails from Toronto, I should say, is working in Toronto. She's currently an independent senior research practitioner, but that's not all, a product discovery coach, but there's more, and a part-time chief product officer at a podcast software company based in Canada. Her path to arrive at this point has been winding. Initially, she studied automotive design in the UK, but realized she wanted to stick closer to home and transitioned into automotive advertising for BMW Canada. After 10 years in various marketing and advertising roles, she transitioned into the tech industry, working her way up from a UX researcher to director of product design and research for Loopio, which is where she met Kirsten, one of Canada's fastest growing B2B SaaS startups. In addition to her full-time roles, Martha started her own consulting business in 2010 and has evolved it from digital marketing strategy to product design and research to product training and leadership services over the year. So a little bit of evolution there. Martha's graciously agreed to be our guest tonight, and I've asked her to tell us why she chose to go independent, how she did it, any tips that she has for you in terms of how to prepare, and then how to come with the answer. Martha, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Raymond. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to share a bit of my own personal experience. I thought that there's a lot of different ways that I could kind of come at this, and I was thinking maybe to structure this in terms of sharing some of the top lessons from the freelancing field, again, from my own perspective. I know that, Raymond, you said there'd be a bit of time afterwards for us for me to field some questions and either, answer different topics that I'm not covering here in the first sort of 10 minutes, or go deeper if there's any area that is interesting and you'd like me to elaborate on. So does that work if I sort of take that approach? Okay, so as Raymond mentioned, I've had a very meandering, what I call a very passion, curiosity-driven career. I've had a whole other life, it feels like, in advertising and marketing. And in 2016 was a really pivotal year for me, where I really shifted into tech and found my love in user experience design and research, and have continued to sort of evolve my career journey to go from that space into other areas like innovation design, service design, UXR and product discovery training, and even fractional product leadership. So I'm someone that really believes that you can continue to grow and evolve your entire career. And that for me is what has been really exciting. So what I wanted to share is from the first lesson, I think prioritizing your overall, or my overall well-being and mental health was a really big factor in what triggered me to leave a really good on paper full-time role when I was at Loopio as the director of design and research. COVID definitely compounded my feelings around the need to really prioritize that. I think everyone in the world was experiencing unique challenges during that time. But one of the things that ever since I can remember hearing about a 4-day work week, so many years ago, that was something that always intrigued me. And I was like, how do I get to that? How do I find a company that will pay me well to work 4 days a week and will respect that time frame? And I went out and I sought it. I looked for it in Toronto. I interviewed at a number of companies. I even tried really hard at Loopio before I took the role there to convince them to change their policy and allow me to come on 4 days a week. That did not work out. And so in the end, I decided, you know what? Sometimes you just got to design your own work life. And so that was a big pillar of when I did decide to become an independent practitioner in November 2021, when I really stepped away from Loopio and decided, okay, I'm going to go really full-time at consulting. I really wanted to make that, sort of stick to that and see, could I make that model work? And what I'll say, I'll report after, however long that is now, over a year and a bit, is that I figured out a way where I can be compensated well and still have a Monday to Thursday sort of time frame that I work with clients, and then I have Fridays for networking, business admin. It takes time to run, your own business, and often you try and fit that into evenings and weekends. I'm fortunate that I can fit a lot of that into my Fridays, as well as do other volunteer opportunities, other things outside of being a UXR or a discovery coach or a fractional product leader, and kind of have more diversity. So for me, that prioritization of well-being and mental health, and kind of really designing, understanding you have the freedom to design, in a way that you don't in many full-time roles, to take advantage of it. In terms of exploring, I'd say an anti-pattern or like a gotcha that I fell into was that at the beginning, when I wasn't sure if I was going to really commit to being an independent practitioner, I was exploring and entertaining full-time role opportunities, and in some cases kind of interviewing on the side of trying to then also do consulting work and then look for new business, kind of adding all those things up. And I really think, from my perspective, that can be very self-sabotaging. It's really important, if you are going to commit to this direction, to really try and give it a fair chance and stay as focused as possible, because starting a freelance business, or again, a consulting practice, it takes time to build up that pipeline, and it takes focus. And if your focus is split, you're kind of, you're just not giving it maybe the fair chance that it deserves. So another lesson that I learned is, I personally hate self-promotion on social media, and sort of this pressure to be an SME in the research space and sort of post on LinkedIn about all the smart things I know or think about research. And it's just, for me, it's always felt very contrived and uncomfortable. And I felt the stress of like, is that the only way I can get new business, if I sort of constantly pump out content and POVs and share and, tweet and do all that? And for me, I just found that that's not naturally where I do best in terms of business development. Where I thrive is actually in networking situations. So, going to either virtual events or in person, sort of networking breakfasts, or even one-on-one, really chasing after referrals. If I know that I've made, I've built a really good relationship, let's say with one founder that I've worked with at a startup, and I know they're connected to all kinds of other founders. So really chasing after those referral opportunities, versus what I think a lot, there's someone in particular in Toronto that I admire very much. Her name is Elizabeth Allen. She has it's called Braze in her company. It's a research consultancy. It's basically her with a few people she adds when necessary. And she is very much the opposite of how I run sort of my business development, where I think she puts a lot of time into that, social presence and being seen and respected in that way. And that suits her really well. So message here is, I think there's different ways, and feel free to explore and find what feels right to you, because business development is not everyone's natural forte. It's not what everyone dreams of doing when they start to be a UXR or continue to be a UXR freelancer, but it's so necessary, and having that continuous heads up mentality. So don't fall into the trap of working on your consulting, and then kind of coming up for air and hoping that if you send a few emails or a few messages or whatever it is, you're going to be able to kind of magically drum up new business. It's something you have to invest time in continually, but I think you can do it in your own way that works for you. Another thing that I found is I've mentioned that I've had these different opportunities to go from things like UXR, UXR opportunities where I'll join a team as I'll become an embedded team member, for example, joining an innovation agency team that's working on a particular project. And I really enjoy that kind of work where I get to kind of parachute in and work with the team. But I've also found that there are other types of opportunities, small early stage startups, for example, they can't afford a full-time UXR. They want a senior level person to be able to really interact with the CEO and the CTO, the CEO, and really help to democratize, or to maybe democratize, not the word, but to help grow the research practice at their organization. So what I realized is, there's a great opportunity where I can take, not just as a senior IC, you think of the rate of doing IC research work. If you're able to train a group of people to do sound research work, that means that your rate can go up because the scale of your impact is scaling to more people. So I tried to look for kind of different level up opportunities. So training was one area. And then from there, I realized that a fractional chief product officer, which honestly, a year ago, I would have definitely thought was impossible and kind of out of reach. I realized that over time that I have accumulated a skill set where I can come into that role from a design and research being my 1-2 and product management actually being my 3rd. But it makes me unique. There's not that many CPOs out there that really do have really strong research and design as well as product management. So I've just realized that I can continually kind of repackage and reframe myself in this quest to work less. Like, I would love to work 2 days a week and make the same money that I make right now at 4 days. That would be an amazing outcome, let's say, in 5-10 years. So my goal is work less to do meaningful work with people I enjoy working with, but come at it honestly. Because again, that makes sense. A CPO gets paid more, has different responsibilities than a senior UXR does. How am I doing on time, Raymond? Time check.
I think this might be a great point to just start entertaining questions, because those have been some terrific tips that you've given, sharing from your own experience. So I would love to give time for questions and just let you call on people that you see, or have people just chime right in.
I see that Jillian here in the chat says, is anyone presenting themselves as a UXR, UX strategist in freelance? What does that look like? Yeah, this is a great, so I'd say anytime you say you're a strategist, I found that there's certain innovation agencies. So I can speak more to Canada and Toronto, but there are places like an interesting place to look up is called The Moment. So if you search The Moment Innovation, they have innovation strategists, or innovation designers is a term they use. An agency I've worked with called Normative, they have a lot of different roles for strategists, and they hire contractors who are strategists. So I found there tends to be a bit more on the agency side of looking for those higher paying strategist role. When you go into, if you're thinking about finding a contract that a company, my experience that a company is looking for, they generally have pretty traditional kind of delineation. So are you a product designer? Are you UX researcher? Are you sometimes a service designer? But often I find the request for a strategist, at least if they're pushing out the opportunity, is I don't find as common. But if you're trying to sell your services, I think strategist is a wonderful way to describe a bit more of the ability to say, I have business acumen, I have research skills, and I can kind of I can go beyond just classic UX research, design, and or like both planning, designing, executing, sharing out insights, kind of that normal area, I feel like, or core area. If you say you're a strategist, that usually means that you can handle more ambiguous, complex problems and synthesize those in order to get to, for example, something that a UX researcher could really take and then go and run with and do and conduct a study. So there's value in that strategist, I think, positioning in that way.
I was hoping so, that's for sure. I actually am certified through Nielsen Norman in their UX management and UX research. And I really think their UX management courses are mislabeled. It really is all about the UX strategy and combining that business with the research. And what I've started saying is you can be a researcher without being a strategist. You really can't be a strategist without being a researcher. They're really intertwined in my mind. But I'm hoping that gives me the edge.
Yeah, I think that everything you're saying resonates with me for sure.
Awesome, thank you.
Does anybody else have?
Megan has a question.
Megan.
Yeah, hi Martha.
Hi.
I was curious what are your main channels for finding companies that are in need of a fractional CPO or lead researcher or whatever the case may be? Like, how do you come into contact with those folks? How do you meet them?
So one of the tricks, because I am a bit of a new business, you know, like don't love doing it. It's like flossing to me a little bit, is that every time that one of the things that I've been trying to practice as a habit is every time that someone gets in touch with me. So a big source of meeting new people for me is I do angel investment, and I run an all-women angel investment fund, and that takes up it's volunteer. But I really did partially get into that because I wanted to find different kind of pools of women that I could, women in business that I could network with. But through that, even just through that activity, I have all kinds of interactions with non-women, men, and other people related to it. And what I find is I just say, so if I know that I have, for example, I have a gap in June, usually I have my pipeline built out a little bit further, but right now I'm sweating it a little bit. I got till May 25th, I have like fully booked, then I have time in June. So every time that somebody touches base with me, that even if it's not related, I will tack on to say, I'd really appreciate if you know of any, founders or companies that might be looking for X, Y, or Z, because I do different things. I'd really love if you would be comfortable to provide an intro, or if you could send me their LinkedIn profile or something. So trying to think about how the people around you that already know you and care about you and want to see you being successful can be like, your ears to the ground. And the other really interesting technique that I learned from another freelancer recently is I asked the founder that I'm currently working with at Quill Inc., whereas we're in the Fractional CPO, could she post on LinkedIn about her experience working with me and basically do a LinkedIn testimonial? And that was actually really effective to get a number of people that reached out with some initial intro meeting curiosities to learn more about my services. So I think piggybacking off of any existing communication you have, so it doesn't feel so awkward, like you're just reaching out and saying, hey, can you help me find work? Like you can use segues. And then also just thinking about, again, who are the people around you that want you to help you, to advocate for you, to be your champions? Do not be afraid to ask for their help.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem. Is anybody else? Let me change my view here so I can see the gallery.
I have a quick question, Martha. Hello, nice to see you. One of the things you mentioned just in answering Megan's question was that, maybe sort of the pipeline management piece to it. And then especially when you're balancing not just different clients, but even different sort of roles, how I guess, like, quite frankly, how do you manage the pipeline and then the different projects and clients and kind of, what's the sort of management strategy for it all and forecasting?
Yeah, I think you need to know yourself in terms of how well you are, how comfortable you are with context switching in order to decide how many projects realistically you want to layer on each other. I definitely see an advantage for me of just working Monday to Thursday with a single, for example, an agency client where I'm an embedded team member, and I kind of turn on Monday and I turn off Thursday. So I think that's part of it, is just understanding like how well do you do at context switching, and don't be careful not to kind of overload yourself, especially at the beginning as you're like strengthening your freelance muscle. I will admit I go over hours. So this is one thing I didn't get a chance to mention in the lessons learned, but I have been burned by sticking to a very rigid hourly rate kind of approach to a pricing model, because my personality is I will put the time and the work in until the deliverables are up to my quality, my personal like standards and quality. And it typically means that I go over the time, the sort of 9 to 5 time that's in a typical work day. So I think, again, it's a little bit of an adjacent topic, but I think it's important when you're thinking about how to value your services, how to price your services, is to make sure that you think holistically, think about how you work, and holistically about the hours that you're going to put in, including the initial upfront discussions to get the actual contract to the final line, and try and bake that into a more fixed project fee pricing that isn't just being counting the hours. Because personally, I've run into, I usually feel like I have way over delivered in those cases, versus when I give myself more contingency, more buffer in a fixed project fee approach, then I can kind of encapsulate that extra time that I know I'm going to put into it. And then Kristen, in terms of Fridays for me, I have a sticky note right here, and it reminds me to constantly kind of groom my pipeline, or who do I need to be following up with? Like, I have stickies all around me that I use as sort of a Kanban like approach to just keeping myself organized in terms of the tasks that I need to stay on top of not only the immediate needs of the projects that I'm on, but also thinking through to business development, and chasing up, usually following up way more than I would like to in order to kind of push something over the line. So it takes hustle and work for sure to confirm or finalize contracts, but again, I think it's super worth it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Martha, this is Fee. Thank you for sharing so far. I had another question. You mentioned earlier you don't necessarily feel super comfortable with the self-promotion kind of aspect on LinkedIn or whatever. Do you, but then you kind of contrasted that with, like, if you're already having a conversation with someone, then you'll kind of like tack on the end, like, oh, hey, if you know of X, Y, and Z, like, pass the information on. Does that feel like self-promotion too, or is it because it's kind of usually a one-on-one communication, it doesn't feel self-promoting? Because I feel like I resonate with what you said, where like you want to get your name out there, but then you're also like, oh, it feels a bit unnatural, I guess,
yeah,
depending on personality.
It's a really good point. Yeah, even, I even was like, about like asking, the founder, Fatima, if she would be comfortable posting about me on LinkedIn. Like, for me, that was like at the edge of sort of generally, it's like, but I was like, I need to be doing these type of things. I feel comfortable in an email, again, because I know the dynamics, and I know there's something reciprocal. So usually I would only ask that to people that I know that I could provide value in exchange. that makes sense. So it's not just like an ask situation. It's someone that, again, I built enough of a relationship with where I feel that there's sort of a gut feeling they would want to help me if they could. I've always had that practice for I feel like my entire career with job searching. I think often people are too quiet when they're looking for a job and not telling enough people around them about what are they passionate about, what are they interested, what kind of work or clients do you want to work with? Because I've just found that even some of the like random conversations I might have had with, I don't know, someone over breakfast or like wherever it is, have actually turned into business opportunities because that person retained, thought it was interesting what I was doing, and connected the dots that they know so-and-so is a CTO who's struggling with that area. Let me put you in touch. Boom. That turns into, literally, that's how I have my current product discovery training engagement, is because someone who was a childhood friend and I were chatting, he thought of a CTO at an investor relations software platform company and was like, you need to meet. And that was it. So I think those connections, those organic connections are really important.
Martha, I had a question. You mentioned a couple times being a fractional product owner. Can you talk about that a little bit? I'm just curious. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. So what I noticed is that a lot of startup companies will invest first in engineering because a founder has an idea and you can't really turn that idea into reality unless you have engineers. Like that is kind of a basic need in terms of software, at least speaking from a software company perspective. So they tend to over-index on engineers early on, and then design, product management, and for sure research kind of like really fall behind that. They typically don't have the budget to hire a full-time chief product officer. But what you'll see is they'll first, because they don't have a lot of money, they'll hire very junior design, product management people onto their teams. And then there's kind of this gap in terms of experience and knowledge, best practices when it comes to product management, design, and research, that I was like, oh, this is a really interesting space because, I like the opportunity of working with different teams, which, because it's right now, it's only 1 day a week that I work with Quill, which is a podcast audience growth software. So I work with that team 1 day a week, and that's what they can afford me. It would be ideal to be 2 days a week, but so what I do is I come in there and I do everything from helping. Right now we're focused on helping to establish a continuous discovery practice using Teresa Torres's Continuous Discovery Habits book, which, if you haven't read that, is, I think, wonderful. Highly recommend that. So establishing that practice, but also helping them with product vision, strategic initiatives, product pillars, and then having the research that they're doing bridged into building out a roadmap for the team. So it's like really quite anchored in research what I'm doing with the team right now, but it definitely has my responsibilities are broader into product vision, strategy, and also just looking at the kind of the triad, so the engineering, design, and product management, like optimizing those dynamics between all three of those is in my responsibility as well.
That's very
But
cool.
I'm kind of making it up as I go along, because this is the first time I've been a fractional CPO, and so it's another stretch opportunity where I'm like, I'm just going to figure this out. I'm going to talk to others. I found out a couple of other fractional CPOs who are willing to chat, share like things like what their rate is was a big thing I wasn't sure about. Like, what do I charge for this? What can I charge for this? So I did my homework there first before, coming back to the founder and negotiating like what this role could look like and basically what kind of budget that they have for me to join the team.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
like Megan has another question.
Thanks, sorry, I keep missing the hands. Megan, you're so cute.
Yeah, no worries. Now I'm just curious about specifically about this role, the fractional CPO role. Do you find that you spend most of your time or more of your time working on sort of the people side of things or the process side of things, or does it feel like a healthy mix of the two in terms of, yeah, I could just see it going either way, kind of more traditional sort of consulting and guiding people versus kind of getting in there and rolling up your sleeves and actually like setting up some of the logistics of the process, the product development process.
Yeah, so this situation is a little bit unique. I was fortunate where I worked with Quill initially for 6 weeks doing a product. I called it it was like product team training at the time. I was like, it wasn't just specific to discovery. So we actually got a grant for it. There's a grant in Ontario, one of Canada's provinces that the founder applied for and actually was able to cover a big part of my fees, which is wonderful. So I got to know the team as basically on like a coach level and really got to know them, which is helpful, assess their skill sets, the gaps, people, process, and tool gaps the team had. That went super well. They were able to make a lot of, really strong progress in the time that I worked with them, which then allowed me to have this follow-up conversation with the founder and led to this opportunity as like becoming a fractional CPO. In my day-to-day now on Thursdays when I work with them, I'd say it really depends on the day. So for example, it's a bit reactionary where the CEO flags to me that there are some, there's some people feedback, there's some sort of behavioral or whatever it is, some process feedback that she really wants me to address. I'll kind of focus on that for a good part of the day. But yeah, I really am there to really more from a mentorship standpoint of making sure that I work most closely with the head of product management, which is a startup, is a funny title, but and then the product designer. And like, I'll be in there in Figma, I'll get in there with her, for example, with Britt in Figma in terms of providing like very hands-on design guidance because she's earlier in her career and she really needs that. Versus the product manager is sort of at an intermediate-ish stage. And like, I back off from that depending on where she has the least amount of expertise is generally around research. So that's where I kind of really try and focus my time with her to provide as much like, whether it's resources, articles, videos, books, or that kind of thing, or if I can be more immediately helpful with a challenge that she's facing, like we'll work through and jam through that kind of thing together.
Thank you.
I'm curious, can I ask the group one question?
Please.
Does anyone have like a fear they would feel comfortable sharing about like what their top fear is about really diving into the freelancer deep end and kind of going for it? I'm curious, like, is this something you've talked about yet about what might be impacting your sort of ability to kind of move in this direction? Very curious.
I'll share mine because I don't know if, oh, sorry, someone else was going to talk.
Oh, you can go ahead. I'll go after you. I've kind of already shared it, but I'll elaborate on it later.
Yeah, sorry, my video keeps going in and out with my internet connection. Don't know what's going on, so it's just off. But Susan, my biggest fear is just finding enough clients, having that income. Like I have a steady income right now. I don't love what I do. And I feel like this is something that everyone I've talked to, this is a similar fear they have, is making enough to be comfortable and knowing that when this job ends, I have another job lined up. It's always like, am I going to have something lined up? Is there going to be something there? Or am I just going to be like scrounging around, knocking on doors? Well, you can't really knock on doors when you're doing UX research, but what can I do to make sure I have enough lined up to keep me busy, but not drowning type of thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm married to someone that is very sales oriented. And it's helpful because in some ways I feel like he's like my sales, business, my BD department in some ways. But one thing that he's encouraged me to think about is to look at the long game, and the long game could be like a year time frame. So if you're doing a little bit of almost like business plan development or that kind of thing, and think about, what is the minimum, like play this game, what is the minimum amount of income that I can make in a year and still like be okay, like whatever that okay threshold to you is, that's very personal. And then instead of thinking about, I need back to back work, think about it as I need, if I start to do some forecasting, I need about this many projects that bring in this much money or this range of money, or my billable hour needs to be at this rate. So you think a little bit differently. It's very hard to have work that perfectly lines up. And I don't know if that's the right problem to solve or the best problem to be thinking about solving, versus if what you're trying to accomplish is reach a certain annual income, you might be able to make twice as much in a certain contract versus another. You know what I mean? Like you might have more flexibility in there that would alleviate some of that pressure of the back-to-back alignment of projects, because it is really challenging. People that I've spoken to that are innovation strategists, for example, that have gone out on their own but formed, let's say, a company of 3. I know one in particular called Faculty of Change. They don't have consistent business come in, but when they do have contracts come in, they're big. So they actually live a lifestyle where they work, I don't know, a fraction of the year on projects, and they have idle time to do other things. There are other things you can do, like create passive income, create a course, create some kind of content that people will pay for. Use your time when you're off and not being paid by a company or whoever to find other ways of making income. Be creative, be adaptable, be flexible. I think that's important if you want to lower that stress level. I would encourage that. Just that creative thinking is helpful. Were you going to share, Jillian? I was curious.
Yeah. Actually, this is a good follow-on to her fear is once you've got the business, and I shared this, I think, before you came on. Back in my early graphic design career, I was doing freelance on the side, and I had a client bounce a check on me, and it really derailed my bank account at that time. I was, working paycheck to paycheck, and him bouncing that check on me really messed me up. And that was the last time I actually did freelance. So going back into it, it's more about how do I protect myself financially, even once I've gotten the job, the project, and they've agreed and everything. How do I protect myself financially, make sure I get paid and that the check doesn't bounce?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've been so fortunate that I've had to chase after some clients in terms of late payments or even payments to the wrong bank accounts, which is stressful. But I'll share that the approach, I've seen different approaches in terms of payment. Payment terms are really important as a freelancer. So the way that I approach is that 50% of my project fees are due upon start date, and then 50% are due at the end. And that payment term depends on the company. I try and negotiate that to be as short as possible, but usually it's either 15 or 30 days. So I cut the risk of that in half, where at least I have that 50% upfront. And it's a hypothesis, but if you think that someone is organized and has the money, has the ability to pay you that 50% upfront, and you don't, again, the caveat is you don't get into some sort of like dispute or conflict about what you deliver in your services, assuming everything goes well, decent to well, that person will also honor that commitment with the last 50%. But I agree, it's always a risk. I haven't heard a ton of other freelancers mention that that's happening on a regular basis to them. So I hope that would be an exception.
Yeah, I did actually. The check that bounced was the first 50%. I never got the second 50%, and unfortunately, at the time that I was in California, and the bank delayed confirming whether or not the check, that gave me the money like the check had cleared, and then waited like 10 days to tell me that it hadn't, and effectively bounced it. So it was partially the bank's fault that things got as far as it did, because I was spending that money because they told me I had it. So, but yeah, I did, and I didn't get too far in. To me, that still sounds like the right model of getting the 50% up front on these types of projects. Just to, first of all, to get a commitment from them as well as committing for yourself. And I always do believe in having a pretty firm scope for that amount of money so that everybody knows what they're getting for their money.
Yeah, I've even had some like Quill for my training engagement, because it was grant money. They gave me all, it was like 25K up front, which blew my mind. But they just were like, here you go. We'd rather just pay you up front. So if you're getting some signs maybe that you're not quite sure about the reliability of the client you're working with, you might want to up that percentage and make it more than 50%, or even consider like, this does feel like a risk. Maybe I should just try and ask for 100% upfront and see and negotiate down from that point. So I'd say also use your instincts. We're all wired to have good instincts, and use them. If your spidey sense says that there's some distrust there, then don't ignore that, and make sure you protect yourself in your contract and in your payment terms.
Absolutely.
Martha, I feel like we could go on another hour. You've got just such great experience to share. It's awesome. But to be fair, I don't want to take you past the time. It's kind of the end of our class. So I just want to thank you so much for being willing to come on and share your experience and help all of these possible freelancers learn some tips to help them in their journey.
Thank you, Raymond. And what I'd say is, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, Martha Malloy. There aren't too many Martha Malloy, so I'm happy to connect. And if you have any follow-up questions, would love to do my best to answer them. And I wish you all the best, and encourage you to stay optimistic that opportunities will materialize if you keep focused and hustle and tell the universe what you want. It will eventually come to you. I believe that. So it's nice to meet everyone.